In the heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, 45-year-old Amish farmer Ezra Stoltzfus lives a simple life with his wife Martha on their modest dairy farm. After losing their only son Samuel in a tragic accident 3 years ago, their marriage has grown distant, filled with unspoken grief. Ezra finds solace in his daily routines, tending to his cows, working the fields, and maintaining the old traditions that have guided his community for generations. But one foggy October morning, while checking his fence line near the dense woods that border his property, Ezra discovers something that will change everything. A 7-year-old girl named Hope, unconscious and severely injured, missing her left arm from what appears to be a recent traumatic amputation. With no identification and speaking only broken English mixed with what sounds like another language, Hope becomes a mystery that challenges everything Ezra thought he knew about faith, family, and the world beyond his Amish community. As Hope recovers under Martha's reluctant care, strange visitors begin appearing at their farm. Men in expensive suits asking questions, a desperate woman claiming to be Hope's mother, and a journalist whose investigation reveals a dark truth about human trafficking and medical exploitation that reaches far beyond their peaceful valley. Ezra must navigate between his community's reluctance to involve the English authorities and his growing conviction that God has placed this broken child in his path for a reason. The story unfolds through 6 chapters of mounting tension, unexpected revelations, and ultimately, a choice that will test the very foundations of Ezra's faith while revealing the true meaning of family, sacrifice, and redemption. The morning mist clung to the Pennsylvania hills like a prayer, whispered too softly to be heard. Ezra Stoltzfus pulled his black wool coat tighter against the October chill as he walked the fence line that separated his dairy farm from the dense woods beyond. His breath came in small puffs of white vapor, and his worn leather boots left dark impressions in the dew-soaked grass. At 45, Ezra had the weathered hands of a man who'd spent his entire life working the land. His beard, now more salt than pepper, reached halfway down his chest in the traditional Amish style, while his dark eyes held the quiet intensity of someone who spoke more to God than to his fellow man. This morning ritual of checking the fences had become sacred to him, not because the cows needed the inspection, but because these quiet moments alone helped him carry the weight of grief that had settled into his bones 3 years ago. 3 years since the accident. 3 years since his 8-year-old son Samuel had chased a runaway calf too close to the pond, and Ezra shook his head, forcing the memory away as he always did. Some wounds, he'd learned, never stopped bleeding. They just learned to bleed quiet. The fence post in his hands was solid, the wire tight, everything in order, as it always was, as it had to be. Order was what held their world together. The careful routines, the established ways, the certainty that came from following the path their fathers had walked before them. It was what had kept him sane when everything else fell apart. He was about to turn back toward the farmhouse when he heard it, a sound so faint it might have been the wind moving through the autumn leaves. But something made him pause, his hand still gripping the wooden post, his head tilted toward the forest. There it was again. Not the wind, crying. Ezra's heart began to beat faster. In all his years walking this land, he'd never heard anything like this coming from the woods. Wild animals, yes. The occasional lost hiker calling for help, though that was rare in these parts. But this sounded like a child. He looked back toward his farmhouse, where thin smoke was beginning to rise from the chimney. Martha would be starting breakfast soon, moving through the kitchen with the same methodical precision she brought to everything these days. Since Samuel's death, they'd become like 2 ships passing in the night, each carrying their own cargo of sorrow, each too afraid to reach out lest they drag the other down deeper. The crying came again, weaker this time, and Ezra made his decision. He climbed over the fence with the practiced ease of a man who'd been doing it for decades, though his knees protested more than they used to. The forest floor was soft beneath his feet, covered with a thick carpet of fallen leaves that muffled his footsteps. "Hello," he called out, his voice seeming strangely loud in the hushed cathedral of trees. "Is someone there?" The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete it made Ezra's ears ring. He pressed forward, pushing aside low-hanging branches and stepping over fallen logs, following an instinct he couldn't name but trusted completely. 20 yards into the woods, he found her. At first, his mind couldn't process what he was seeing. A small figure huddled against the base of an enormous oak tree, so still that for a heart-stopping moment he thought he'd found a body. But then the figure shifted slightly, and he saw the rise and fall of breathing. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing what had once been a white dress that was now torn and stained with mud and something darker. Her dark hair was matted against her head, and her face was pale as morning frost. But it was what he didn't see that made him gasp and take an involuntary step backward. Her left arm was gone. Not gone. Ezra corrected himself as he knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he reached out to check for a pulse. The wound looked recent, maybe a few days old, and had been roughly bandaged with strips of cloth that were now soaked through with dried blood. Someone had tried to care for her, but whoever it was, they were no doctor. "Little one," he whispered, his voice gentle as he'd once used with his own son. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, the most beautiful blue eyes he'd ever seen, but filled with such terror that it nearly broke his heart. She tried to scramble away from him, crying out in a language he didn't recognize, but she was too weak to move more than a few inches. "Shh, shh," Ezra soothed, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I won't hurt you. I want to help." She stared at him with those impossibly blue eyes, and he could see her mind working, trying to decide if he was friend or enemy. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, and the words came in broken English with an accent he couldn't place. "Please, no more hurt. Please." Something inside Ezra's chest cracked open. Not his heart breaking, but something harder and more calcified, something that had been protecting him from feeling too much for too long. This child, this broken little bird huddled against a tree in his woods, needed him in a way that transcended all the careful boundaries he'd built around his life. "No more hurt," he promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "What's your name, little one?" She studied his face for a long moment, and he had the strange feeling she was reading something there that even he didn't know was written. Finally, she whispered, "Hope, Hope," he repeated, and the name felt like a prayer on his lips. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Ezra. Can you tell me what happened to you? How did you get here?" But Hope's eyes were already fluttering closed again, her small body going limp against the tree. Panic shot through Ezra as he checked her pulse, weak but steady. She was alive, but bare. He looked around the forest, half expecting to see someone watching, but there was nothing except the ancient trees and the morning mist that seemed to swirl around them like a protective shroud. Whoever had left this child here was long gone. Ezra made his decision quickly. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around Hope's tiny frame, then gathered her into his arms as carefully as he could. She weighed almost nothing, far too little for a child her age, and her skin felt cold as winter stirred. The walk back to the farmhouse felt like the longest journey of his life. With each step, questions multiplied in his mind like crows gathering before a storm. Who was this child? Where had she come from? What kind of monster would hurt a little girl this way and leave her to die in the woods? But beneath all the questions, one certainty grew stronger with each step. God had placed Hope in his path for a reason. After 3 years of feeling abandoned by the divine, after 3 years of wondering if his prayers fell on deaf ears, here was something that demanded both his faith and his action. The farmhouse came into view just as the sun finally burned through the morning mist. It was a simple 2-story structure, painted white with green shutters, surrounded by the barn, chicken coop, and outbuildings that made up their small homestead. Smoke still rose from the chimney, and through the kitchen window he could see Martha moving about in her morning routine. Martha. How was he going to explain this to Martha? His wife had built walls around her heart after Samuel's death, walls that seemed to grow higher every day. She went through the motions of their life together, cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, attending Sunday services, but it was as if she was sleepwalking through it all. The woman he'd married 22 years ago, the one who used to laugh until tears ran down her cheeks and who sang while she worked, had disappeared the day they buried their son. How would she react to him, bringing home another child, a broken, mysterious child who would need care and attention and love, all the things Martha had locked away where they couldn't hurt her anymore? But as Ezra looked down at Hope's pale face nestled against his chest, he knew he had no choice. This child needed help, and help was what she would get, whatever the cost. He climbed the porch steps carefully, trying not to jostle his small passenger, and pushed open the kitchen door. The familiar smells of coffee and bacon hit him, along with the warmth of the wood stove that had been heating their home for over 2 decades. Martha stood at the counter with her back to him, her prayer cap pinned neatly over brown hair that she wore, pulled back in the traditional style. She was cutting vegetables for what would likely be another silent breakfast, her movements precise and economical as everything about her had become. "You're late," she said without turning around. "Coffee's getting cold." "Martha," Ezra said quietly, "I need you to turn around." Something in his tone must have alerted her, because she set down her knife and slowly pivoted to face him. Her brown eyes, once warm as honey, now mostly just tired, widened as they took in the sight of him holding a child wrapped in his coat. "Ezra," she breathed. "What? Who is that?" "Her name is Hope," he said, moving carefully toward the kitchen table. "I found her in the woods. She's hurt bad, Martha. Real bad." Martha's hand flew to her mouth as she saw the blood-stained bandages where Hope's left arm should have been. For a moment the old Martha flickered in her eyes, the woman who would have immediately sprung into action, who would have already been boiling water and gathering clean cloth. But then the walls slammed back into place. "You can't," she said, shaking her head. "Ezra, you can't bring her here, hell. She'll die if I don't," he said simply, laying Hope gently on the kitchen table. "Look at her, Martha. Really look at her." Martha did look, and Ezra saw the exact moment when her maternal instincts warred with her self-protection. Hope stirred slightly, murmuring something in that foreign language, and one small hand clutched weakly at the air, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. "We have to call the English authorities," Martha said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The police, or child services, after we make sure she's not going to die on our kitchen table," Ezra said firmly. "Help me, Martha. Please." For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, husband and wife stared at each other across the small kitchen that had once been filled with Samuel's laughter. Ezra could see the battle raging behind Martha's eyes, the war between the woman who had once opened her heart to every stray animal and lost soul, and the woman who had learned that loving something meant risking the agony of losing it. Finally, Martha closed her eyes and nodded once. "Get me the first aid kit from the pantry," she said, already moving toward the sink to wash her hands, "and put more water on to boil. We're going to need a lot of it." As Ezra hurried to comply, Hope's eyes fluttered open again. She looked around the unfamiliar kitchen with obvious fear, but when her gaze landed on Martha's face, something shifted. Maybe it was the gentle competence in Martha's movements, or maybe it was simply the universal recognition of one person who had suffered seeing another, who understood suffering. "It's okay, sweetheart," Martha said softly, her voice rusty from disuse, but warm in a way Ezra hadn't heard in 3 years. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you anymore." Hope's lips moved, and Martha leaned closer to hear. "Mama?" Hope whispered. Martha's breath caught, and for a moment Ezra thought she might break completely. But instead she reached out with one gentle hand and smoothed Hope's matted hair away from her forehead. "I'm here," she said, and though the words came out like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep, they were enough. Outside, the morning sun finally broke free of the mist, sending golden light streaming through the kitchen windows. It fell across the three of them, the broken child, the grieving woman, and the man who had found them all standing at the edge of something that would change their lives forever. In the distance, a car engine could be heard approaching on the gravel road that led to their farm. Ezra and Martha looked at each other with sudden alarm. They rarely had visitors, especially this early in the morning. The engine grew closer, then stopped somewhere near their front gate. Hope's eyes went wide with terror at the sound, and she tried to sit up despite her weakness. "No," she whispered frantically. "No, they find me. They find me." Martha's protective instincts finally overcame her fear. She placed a firm but gentle hand on Hope's shoulder, keeping her lying down. "Who, sweetheart? Who's looking for you?" But Hope was too frightened to answer coherently. She babbled in that unknown language, tears streaming down her pale cheeks, her one remaining hand clutching desperately at Martha's apron. Heavy footsteps approached the porch, followed by a sharp knock on the front door. Ezra looked through the kitchen window and saw a black sedan parked at the edge of their property, expensive and completely out of place among the rolling farmland. "Ezra Stoltzfus," a man's voice called from the front porch. "We need to talk to you. It's about the child." The color drained from Martha's face. Hope whimpered and tried to burrow deeper into Ezra's coat, her terror so palpable it seemed to fill the room. Ezra felt something cold settle in his stomach. How could anyone possibly know about Hope already? He'd found her less than an hour ago and had lived miles from their nearest neighbor. Unless whoever had hurt this child was still looking for her. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, accompanied by the sound of at least two sets of footsteps moving around the porch. Ezra's mind raced as he tried to process the situation. Hope's reaction told him everything he needed to know. These weren't rescue workers or concerned authorities. These were the people she was running from. "Martha," he whispered urgently, "take Hope upstairs, the back bedroom, the one that overlooks the barn. Keep her quiet and keep her hidden." Martha didn't argue. The maternal instinct that had been dormant for 3 years blazed to life as she carefully scooped Hope into her arms. The little girl buried her face against Martha's shoulder, her small body trembling like a leaf in a storm. "What about you?" Martha asked, already moving toward the back stairs. "I'll handle them," Ezra said with more confidence than he felt. "Go." As Martha's soft footsteps disappeared up the stairs, Ezra quickly gathered the blood-stained cloths and the first aid supplies, shoving them into a kitchen drawer. He splashed cold water on his face at the sink, trying to compose himself, then walked to the front door with measured steps. Through the window he could see two men in expensive dark suits, standing on his porch. They looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine, perfectly groomed, with the kind of shoes that cost more than most of his neighbors made in a month. Everything about them screamed money and power, and neither belonged on an Amish farm at sunrise. Ezra opened the door just wide enough to stand in the frame, blocking their view of the interior. "Can I help you?" The taller of the two men stepped forward. He was in his 50s, with silver-gray hair slicked back and cold blue eyes that reminded Ezra uncomfortably of a snake. When he smiled, it never reached those eyes. "Mr. Stoltzfus, I presume? I'm Dr. Marcus Vance, and this is my associate, Mr. Chen. We're looking for a child who may have wandered onto your property. A little girl about 7 years old, dark hair. She's unwell." "Unwell?" Ezra kept his voice level, though his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "She has special medical needs." The second man, Chen, spoke up. He was younger, maybe 40, with the kind of hard face that suggested he was more than just an associate. "She requires immediate medical attention. Her family is very worried." "I haven't seen any children," Ezra lied, meeting their stares without flinching. "As you can see, this is a working farm. We're up early tending to our animals. If there was a lost child on my property, I would have found her by now. Dr. Vance's smile grew wider and somehow more menacing. Of course, but you wouldn't mind if we took a look around, would you? Just to put our minds at ease. The child's condition makes her unpredictable. She might be hiding. Actually, I would mind, Ezra said firmly. This is private property, and you haven't shown me any identification or legal authority to search it. If you're truly concerned about a missing child, I suggest you contact the proper authorities. Chen's hand moved slightly inside his jacket, and Ezra's blood ran cold as he realized the man was likely armed. But before either visitor could respond, a familiar voice called out from across the yard. Ezra, good morning. Relief flooded through Ezra as he saw his neighbor, Jacob Byler, walking up the driveway with his characteristic unhurried gait. Jacob was in his 60s, with the kind of presence that came from being an elder in their community, respected, unshakable, and possessing an intuitive understanding of when something wasn't right. Jacob, Ezra called back, never taking his eyes off the two men. Come join us. These gentlemen were just asking about a lost child. Jacob's shrewd eyes took in the expensive car, the out-of-place visitors, and the tension radiating from Ezra. His expression remained pleasantly neutral, but Ezra could see the wheels turning behind those weathered features. A lost child. Jacob approached the porch with slow, deliberate steps. How terrible. Around here, when a child goes missing, the whole community helps search. Have you contacted Bishop Miller? He can organize search parties from all the neighboring farms. Dr. Vance's composure cracked slightly. That won't be necessary. We're handling this privately. Family matter, you understand. Family matter. Jacob's bushy eyebrows rose. If it's a family matter, where is the family? Why aren't the parents here searching themselves? The parents are indisposed, Chen said curtly. We're acting on their behalf. Jacob nodded thoughtfully, but Ezra could see the skepticism in his old friend's eyes. I see. And you are? Dr. Marcus Vance. I run a private medical facility that specializes in children with unique needs. A medical facility, Jacob repeated. You wouldn't mind showing us your identification, would you? Medical credentials? Something that establishes your authority to be searching for this child? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Dr. Vance's practiced smile finally disappeared entirely, replaced by something much colder. I don't think that's necessary. Oh, but I think it is, Jacob said mildly. You see, we had some problems a few years back with people claiming to be authorities when they weren't. Scammers? Mostly, but it made us all more careful about verifying credentials. Chen stepped forward, his hand still hovering near his jacket. We don't have time for this. We need to search the property. Now. No, Ezra said firmly. You don't. And if you try to force your way onto my land, I'll be the one calling the authorities. For a moment, the situation balanced on a knife's edge. Ezra could see the calculation going on behind Dr. Vance's eyes, weighing options, considering risks. Finally, the older man seemed to come to a decision. Very well, he said, the fake pleasantness returning to his voice like a mask sliding back into place. But Mr. Stoltzfus, if you do happen to see this child, please contact me immediately. He pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. Ezra didn't take it. I told you if I found a lost child, I'd contact the proper authorities. Dr. Vance's eyes hardened, but he slipped the card back into his pocket. Of course, the proper authorities. He looked directly at Ezra, and his next words carried the weight of a threat. I do hope nothing unfortunate happens to any lost children who don't receive the medical care they desperately need. With that, he turned and walked back toward the sedan, Chen following close behind. They climbed into the car without another word, and Ezra watched as it drove away, kicking up gravel and leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. Only when the car disappeared around the bend did Jacob speak. Well, that was interesting, Jacob, Ezra began, but his neighbor held up a hand. No need to explain, my friend. But whatever you've gotten yourself into, you're not in it alone. That's what community is for. Ezra felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly knocked him off his feet. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Jacob said with a wry smile. Something tells me those men will be back, and next time they might not be so polite about asking permission. Inside the house, Ezra found Martha in the back bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with Hope cradled in her arms. The little girl had finally succumbed to exhaustion and was sleeping fitfully, occasionally murmuring in that foreign language. "Did they leave?" Martha asked quietly. For now, Ezra sat heavily in the room's only chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 45 years. "But they'll be back. That man, Dr. Vance, he's not going to give up easily. What do they want with her?" Martha's voice was barely above a whisper, but it was fierce with protective anger. What kind of monsters hurt a child like this? Before Ezra could answer, Hope stirred in Martha's arms. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a moment she seemed confused about where she was. Then the memories came flooding back, and she tried to sit up, panic written across her small features. "They here?" she asked, her accented English thick with fear. "No, sweetheart," Martha soothed, gently stroking Hope's hair. "They're gone. You're safe." "Not safe," Hope shook her head violently. "Never safe. They always find. They take children. She struggled for the English words, then lapsed into rapid speech in her native language. Ezra knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to Hope's eye level. "Hope, I need you to tell me the truth. Who are those men? What do they want with you?" Hope looked at him with those impossibly blue eyes, and he could see her trying to decide whether to trust him with whatever terrible secret she carried. Finally she spoke, her voice so quiet they had to strain to hear her. "They take children from families, poor families who need money." She held up her remaining hand, fingers trembling. "They say they help, give medicine, make better, but they lie." "What do they really do?" Martha asked. Though from her tone, Ezra suspected she already dreaded the answer. "They sell pieces," Hope whispered, and the simple words hit the room like a physical blow. "Arms, legs, eyes, kidneys. Rich people who need transplants. They pay much money. Children like me, nobody miss us. Nobody look for us." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Martha's sharp intake of breath. Ezra felt sick, his mind recoiling from the implications of what Hope had just told them. Organ harvesting, child trafficking, things he'd only heard about in whispered conversations about the dark corners of the world beyond their peaceful valley. "Your arm," Martha said, her voice breaking. "They took your arm." Hope nodded, tears beginning to stream down her cheek. "Was supposed to take kidney too, but something go wrong. Other children, they helped me escape, but guards chase us, and others." Her voice trailed off, but they could fill in the terrible blanks. "How did you get here?" Ezra asked gently. "Run through woods for days. So hungry, so tired. Thought I would die, but then you find me." She looked at him with something approaching wonder. "You are Angel, despite everything." Ezra found himself smiling. "No, little one, just a farmer. Farmer Angel," Hope said solemnly, as if that settled the matter. Martha wiped away her own tears and stood up with sudden determination. "Well, Farmer Angel or not, we need to figure out what to do next. Those men aren't going to give up, and we can't hide her forever." "We could contact the police," Ezra suggested, though he could hear the doubt in his own voice. "With what proof?" Martha countered. "The word of a traumatized child who barely speaks English. And what if this Dr. Vance has connections? Men with that kind of money usually do." Hope grabbed Ezra's hand with surprising strength. "No police, please. They have police too, in other places. They make children disappear." The weight of the situation settled over them like a shroud. They were simple people living simple lives, and now they were facing something that seemed impossibly large and dangerous. But as Ezra looked at Hope's frightened face, he knew there was only one choice they could make. "Then we keep her safe ourselves," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes." "Ezra," Martha began, "we don't know what we're getting into. These people, they sound dangerous. What if we don't?" Ezra interrupted. "What if we turn our backs on her? Could you live with that?" Martha looked down at Hope, who was watching their conversation with the intense focus of a child who understood that her fate was being decided. The little girl's one remaining hand was still clutched in Ezra's much larger one, and something in that simple gesture seemed to decide the matter. "No," Martha said quietly, "I couldn't." "Then it's settled," Ezra said. "Hope stays with us. We'll figure out the rest as we go." But even as he spoke the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had just crossed a line from which there would be no going back. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the wind was picking up, rattling the windows and making the old house creak and groan. Change was coming to their quiet valley, whether they were ready for it or not. Hope squeezed his hand tighter and whispered something in her native language. When he looked at her questioningly, she translated, "I say thank you to God for sending me to good people." She paused, then added with the simple faith of a child, "Mama always say God watches over sparrows. Maybe he watch over broken children too." Martha's breath caught, and she sat back down on the bed, pulling Hope close. "Maybe he does, sweetheart. Maybe he does." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the windows like tears from heaven. But inside the small farmhouse, three unlikely souls had found each other in the darkness, and for the first time in years, something that might have been hope began to bloom in the Stoltzfus' home. It would be tested soon enough, but for now, it was enough. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet. Hope's physical condition slowly improved under Martha's devoted care. Her fever broke, the wound began to show signs of proper healing, and she managed to keep down small portions of Martha's homemade soup. But the emotional scars ran deeper than any physical injury, and every unexpected sound sent the little girl into fits of terror. Ezra had contacted Dr. Sarah Mitchell, an English physician who had quietly provided medical care to their community for years when their traditional remedies weren't enough. She came under cover of darkness on the second night, her weathered medical bag in hand, and her lips pressed into a grim line after examining Hope's injuries. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. She told Ezra and Martha in hushed tones after Hope had fallen asleep. The amputation was surgical, clean, precise. This wasn't some back-alley butcher job. Someone with real medical training cut off that child's arm. "Can you tell how long ago?" Martha asked, her knitting needles clicking steadily in her lap. She'd taken up the old habit again since Hope's arrival, her hands needing something to do while her mind processed the horror of their situation. 4, maybe 5 days. The healing is remarkable. Actually, they used proper surgical techniques, high-quality sutures. If I didn't know better, I'd say it was done in a real hospital. Dr. Mitchell shook her head in disgust. "What kind of monsters are we dealing with?" "The kind that won't give up easily," Ezra said, peering out the kitchen window into the darkness. He'd been checking the windows constantly, watching for any sign of the black sedan or other unfamiliar vehicles. Dr. Mitchell left them with antibiotics, pain medication, and strict instructions about caring for Hope's injury. She also left them with a sobering warning: if these people are as connected as the child suggests, you need to be very careful about who you trust. Money like that can buy a lot of loyalty, even from people you'd never expect. Now, on the third morning, Ezra was in the barn milking their Jersey cow, Buttercup, when he heard a car approaching. His hands stilled on the cow's udder as he listened to the engine, different from the sedan, smaller, less powerful. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on his work apron, and moved to the barn door. A beat-up Honda Civic was parked near the house, rain streaming down its windows. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out into the downpour. She was in her 30s, with dark hair plastered to her head, and wearing clothes that had seen better days, jeans with holes in the knees, a thin jacket that offered little protection from the weather, and sneakers that squelched in the mud as she hurried toward the porch. Everything about her screamed desperation. Ezra approached the house cautiously, keeping to the shadows of the barn. Through the kitchen window he could see Martha moving about, but there was no sign of hope. They'd taken to keeping her in the upstairs bedroom during the day, away from prying eyes. The woman knocked on the front door, and Ezra could hear her calling out even from his position by the barn. "Please, please, I know you're in there. I need help. Martha appeared at the front door, opening it just a crack, as Ezra had done with Dr. Vance and his associate. Ezra moved closer, staying hidden but close enough to hear the conversation. "Can I help you?" Martha asked, her voice wary. "My name is Elena Rodriguez," the woman said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm looking for my daughter. Her name is Esperanza, but she goes by Hope now. She's 7 years old. Dark hair, blue eyes. Someone told me she might be here." Ezra felt his blood turn to ice. Another person looking for Hope, but this time claiming to be her mother. He studied the woman's face, noting the genuine anguish in her features, the way her hands shook as she wiped rain from her eyes. Unlike Vance and Chen, everything about her suggested someone who had lost something precious and was desperate to get it back. But that didn't mean she could be trusted. "I'm sorry," Martha said carefully, "but I haven't seen any children matching that description." Elena's face crumpled. "Please, you don't understand. They took her from me 3 months ago. They said they could help her, give her opportunities I couldn't provide. They said they'd send money, let her visit, but then..." She broke down completely, sobbing in the rain. Martha's resolve visibly wavered. Despite everything they'd been through, her compassionate nature was still intact, and seeing another mother in pain clearly affected her deeply. "Come in out of the rain," Martha said finally, opening the door wider. "At least let me get you a towel and some coffee." Elena stepped inside, leaving puddles on the kitchen floor. Ezra moved to a position where he could see through the kitchen window, while remaining hidden. From upstairs, he could hear the faint sound of footsteps. Hope, no doubt drawn by the sound of voice. "Thank you," Elena said, accepting a towel from Martha. "I've been driving for days, following every lead, every rumor. Someone in town said they saw men in suits, asking about a little girl at Amish farms. I thought maybe..." "What men in suits?" Martha asked, though Ezra could tell she already knew the answer. "The ones who took her," Elena said bitterly. "Dr. Vance and his people. They run what they call a medical research facility, but it's really just a front for..." She struggled with the word, "for harvesting organs from children. Poor children whose families are desperate enough to believe their lies." Martha sank into a chair, the color draining from her face. "You gave them your daughter. I thought I was saving her," Elena cried. "My husband died 2 years ago, and I've been working 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. When they approached me, they said they could give Esperanza the best medical care, education, a chance at a real future. They offered me money, more money than I'd ever seen. They said she'd be like a daughter to a wealthy family who couldn't have children of their own. But that wasn't true," Martha said softly. "No. A month after she left, I got suspicious when they wouldn't let me talk to her on the phone. I started asking questions, digging around. That's when I found out what they really do." Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. "They use the children for spare parts. Hearts, kidneys, whatever their clients need. The kids are just inventory." From upstairs came a small gasp, and all 3 women, Martha, Elena, and someone hidden from view, seemed to freeze. Elena's head snapped up, and her eyes went wide with hope. "Esperanza," she called out. "Mija, is that you?" There was a long pause, then the sound of small feet on the stairs. Hope appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving slowly, her one remaining arm wrapped around her thin body. She stared at Elena with an expression that was hard to read. Part recognition, part fear, part something that might have been longing. Elena let out a sob and started toward her, but Hope stepped back, bumping into Martha's legs. "Esperanza, it's me. It's Mama." "I know," Hope said quietly, her accented English steady but guarded. "But why you give me to bad men?" The question hit Elena like a physical blow. She stopped moving toward Hope and instead sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was helping you. They lied to me, Mija. They told me you would have a better life, and I I was so scared I couldn't give you what you needed. We had no money, no food sometimes. I thought they would take care of you. They cut off my arm," Hope said with the matter-of-fact tone. Children sometimes use for devastating truths. "They were going to take my kidney too, but other children helped me escape." Elena's sobs grew louder, her whole body shaking with grief and guilt. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mij. I never meant for this to happen. I just wanted you to have a chance." Hope studied her mother's face for a long moment. Ezra could see the war playing out behind the little girl's eyes, the natural love of a child for her mother, battling against the trauma of betrayal and abandonment. Finally, Hope took a tentative step forward. "You didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know. If I had known what they really wanted," Elena's voice broke, "I would have died before I let them touch you." Hope took another step, then another, until she was standing directly in front of Elena. With her one remaining hand, she gently touched her mother's tear-stained cheek. "Don't cry, Mama. I'm alive. That's what matters." Elena pulled Hope into a fierce embrace, and for a moment, Ezra felt like he was intruding on something sacred. But the moment was shattered by the sound of car doors slamming outside. Through the kitchen window, Ezra saw the black sedan parked behind Elena's Honda, along with a white van he didn't recognize. Dr. Vance and Chen were climbing out of the sedan, but they weren't alone this time. 3 other men emerged from the van, hard-looking individuals who moved with the precision of military training. "Martha," Ezra called out urgently as he ran toward the house. "They're back, and they brought reinforcements." Elena's face went white. "They followed me. Oh God, they followed me." Hope immediately began to shake, her small body pressed against Martha as if she could somehow disappear into the older woman's embrace. "They take me back," she whispered. "They finish what they over my dead body," Martha said with a fierce determination that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Dr. Vance's voice carried clearly through the rain as he approached the house. "Mrs. Rodriguez, we know you're in there. You've caused us quite a bit of trouble." Ezra burst through the kitchen door, immediately assessing the situation. "How many ways out of this house?" he asked Martha. "Back door leads to the garden. Side door goes to the cellar." "The cellar," Ezra decided. "There's a tunnel that leads to the old root cellar behind the barn. My grandfather built it during Prohibition." "You have a tunnel?" Elena asked in amazement. "Long story. Martha, get them down there. I'll try to buy you some time." But before Martha could move, the front door exploded inward, kicked off its hinges by one of the men from the van. Dr. Vance walked calmly into the kitchen, flanked by his hired muscle, water dripping from his expensive coat. "Really, Mr. Stoltzfus," he said with mock disappointment. "All this drama could have been avoided if you'd just been honest with me the first time." Chen stepped forward, and this time he didn't bother to hide the gun in his hand. "Dr. Rodriguez, you've been very naughty. We specifically told you what would happen if you interfered with our operations." Elena stepped protectively in front of Hope, but her whole body was trembling. "She's my daughter. You can't just take her." "Actually," Dr. Vance said with clinical detachment, "according to the contracts you signed, we can do whatever we deem medically necessary. You relinquished parental rights, remember? Those contracts were lies. Nevertheless, they're legally binding, and our client is still waiting for his kidney transplant." His cold eyes focused on Hope, who was pressed against Martha's side. "Really, child, you've caused quite a disruption. But don't worry, we'll make sure the next procedure goes much more smoothly." "You're not taking her anywhere," Martha said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Dr. Vance raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Stoltzfus, isn't it? I do admire your maternal instincts, but you're out of your depth here. This is a business transaction, nothing more." One of the hired men stepped toward Hope, but Ezra moved to block his path. "You'll have to go through me first." "Ezra, no," Martha cried, but it was too late. The man was built like a tank, and he swatted Ezra aside with casual ease. Ezra hit the kitchen wall hard, sliding to the floor with a groan. Hope screamed as the man reached for her, but Martha surprised everyone by grabbing a cast-iron skillet from the stove and bringing it down hard on the back of his head. He dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the floor. "Well," Dr. Vance said mildly, "that was unexpected." Chen raised his gun, pointing it directly at Martha's chest. "Step away from the child, ma'am." The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of rain against the windows and Hope's quiet sobbing. Ezra struggled to his feet, his vision blurry but his determination intact. Elena stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as she realized her attempt to rescue her daughter had only made things worse. Then, from outside came the sound of multiple vehicles approaching, engines roaring, tires squealing on wet gravel. Through the window, Ezra could see pickup trucks and buggies converging on the farmhouse, their headlights cutting through the rain like beacons of hope. Dr. Vance frowned, moving to the window. What the hell? The cavalry had arrived, and it looked like the entire Amish community was with them. Jacob Byler was the first through the door, his weathered face set in grim determination. Behind him came a stream of Amish men, farmers, carpenters, blacksmiths, each one carrying the quiet authority that came from a lifetime of hard work and unshakable faith. Bishop Miller followed, his presence commanding immediate respect even from the armed intruders. Dr. Vance's composure finally cracked as he realized his carefully controlled situation was spiraling beyond his grasp. "Who are these people?" "Neighbors," Ezra said, wiping blood from his split lip as he struggled to his feet. "In our community, when one family is threatened, we all stand together." Chen swung his gun toward the newcomers, but found himself facing a wall of calm, unflinching faces. These weren't people who scared easily. They'd weathered droughts, floods, economic hardships, and religious persecution. A man with a gun was just another trial to endure with faith and solidarity. "You need to leave," Bishop Miller said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "You're not welcome here." Dr. Vance let out a harsh laugh. "You think a bunch of farmers can intimidate me? I have contracts, legal documents. That child belongs to my organization." "No child belongs to anyone but God and their family," the bishop replied, "and that little girl has found sanctuary here." One of the younger Amish men, Daniel Yoder, stepped forward. Ezra noticed he was carrying something in his hand, a small digital camera. "We've been recording everything since we arrived," Daniel said calmly. "Every threat, every illegal action. Amazing what modern technology can capture, isn't it?" Dr. Vance's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. This operation has protection at the highest levels. Police, judges, politicians, they all understand the necessity of what we do." "Maybe," Jacob said with a slight smile. "But do they understand it when it's broadcast on the evening news? Young Daniel here, he might dress plain, but he's got connections with English journalists who'd love to hear this story." "You're bluffing." Daniel held up his cell phone, showing a number already dialed. "One button, and this whole conversation goes live to Channel 8. They've been investigating rumors of organ trafficking in the state for months." For the first time since entering the house, Dr. Vance looked genuinely uncertain. His eyes darted between the phone, the camera, and the growing crowd of witnesses. Chen still held his gun, but he was clearly outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Hope, still pressed against Martha's side, whispered something in Spanish. Elena, tears still streaming down her face, translated, "She says they're like angels, guardian angel." "Not angels," Bishop Miller corrected gently, his eyes never leaving Dr. Vance. "Just people who believe in protecting the innocent." Dr. Vance seemed to weigh his options for a long moment. Finally, he straightened his jacket and attempted to regain his composure. "This isn't over. We have significant resources and legal backing. That child will be returned to our custody." "Over our dead bodies," Martha said fiercely, surprising everyone with her vehemence. "That can be arranged," Chen muttered. But Dr. Vance held up a hand to stop him. "No, too many witnesses now, and too much attention." He looked directly at Hope, and his smile returned, cold and predatory. "Enjoy your temporary reprieve, child. But remember, We always collect what we're owed. Get out, Ezra said, his voice rough with barely controlled anger. Get out of my house, off my land, and don't come back. Dr. Vance nodded to his men, and they began to file out of the kitchen. The unconscious thug was dragged away by his companions, still limp from Martha's skillet attack. At the doorway, Dr. Vance paused. You people have no idea what you've just done. The consequences will be severe. The consequences are in God's hands, Bishop Miller replied, as are we all. After the intruders left, the kitchen filled with the quiet murmur of concerned voices as the community members checked on everyone's well-being. Hope clung to both Martha and Elena, overwhelmed by the sudden safety after so much fear. Sarah Mitchell pushed through the crowd, having been summoned by one of the younger men. She immediately began examining Ezra's injuries while casting worried glances at Hope. How did you all know to come? Martha asked Jacob as she settled Hope on a kitchen chair, the little girl still shaking from the confrontation. Daniel saw the cars heading this way, Jacob explained. He was driving back from town when he spotted that sedan. After our conversation the other day, he figured you might need help. Daniel, still holding his camera, grinned. Plus, I actually do have a friend at Channel 8. Journalism degree before I joined the church. Sometimes the English world has its use. Bishop Miller approached Elena, who was hovering uncertainly near her daughter. You're the child's mother? Elena nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Then you're welcome in our community for as long as you need sanctuary, he said simply. A mother belongs with her child. But I gave her away, Elena whispered. I failed her in the worst possible way. Hope looked up at her mother, then at the bishop. With her one good hand, she reached out and took Elena's fingers. Mama made mistake, but mistake not same as bad heart. Bad heart is men who hurt children for money. The simple wisdom of the 7-year-old's words seemed to echo through the crowded kitchen. Elena broke down completely, falling to her knees beside Hope's chair. Can you ever forgive me? Hope considered this with the seriousness children bring to important questions. Jesus says we forgive, right? She looked at Martha for confirmation. That's right, sweetheart, Martha said softly, stroking Hope's hair. Then I forgive, Hope decided. No more giving away. Promise? I promise, Elena sobbed. I swear on your father's grave, I will never let anyone hurt you again. Dr. Mitchell finished bandaging Ezra's head and turned her attention to the group. We need to discuss practical matters. Those men will be back, probably with more resources and different tactics. You can't stay here indefinitely. Where can we go? Elena asked, desperately. They have money, connections. They found us here. Actually, Daniel said, lowering his camera, I might have an idea about that. But first, we need to document everything Hope remembers about that facility. Names, locations, other children, everything. If we're going to stop these people, we need evidence. Hope shrank back against Martha at the suggestion. Scary to remember. I know, sweetheart, Martha said gently. But if you can be brave enough to tell the truth, maybe you can help save other children like you. Hope looked around the kitchen at all the faces watching her with concern and compassion. These people, strangers just days ago, had risked their lives to protect her. The least she could do was try to protect other children. Okay, she whispered. I try to remember. Over the next hour, with Elena holding one hand and Martha stroking her hair, Hope told her story. It came out in fragments, sometimes in English, sometimes in Spanish, sometimes in broken sobs that needed no translation. She described a compound in the mountains maybe 2 hours' drive from Lancaster County. She remembered other children, some as young as 5, others in their early teens. She talked about doctors who smiled while they examined the children like livestock, about rooms that smelled like hospitals and fear. Daniel recorded everything, while Dr. Mitchell took notes from a medical perspective. Bishop Miller listened with growing horror, his face pale but determined. There were 12 children when I escaped, Hope said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. Maria, she was 5, and Carlos, he was my friend. They took his eye for rich man who needed one. He cried every night. Alina made a choking sound, but Hope continued. The guards, they said, we were lucky, said we had purpose, that rich people needed what we had, said we should be proud to help. She looked up at the adults surrounding her, but it didn't feel like helping, it felt like dying, little bit at a time. How did you escape? Jacob asked gently. Carlos and Maria, and 2 older boys, they made plan. During mealtime, when guards not watching so close, they make noise, break things. I run into woods. Older boys, they stayed behind to make sure I get away. The kitchen fell silent as the implications sank in. Those older boys had sacrificed themselves to save Hope, knowing they would face terrible punishment. We have to help them, Martha said suddenly. All of them. We can't just save Hope and abandon the others. Martha, Ezra began. These people are dangerous. We're not equipped to. Then we find people who are equipped, she interrupted with steel in her voice. I won't sit here safe and comfortable, knowing there are other children suffering what Hope went through. Daniel looked up from his notes. Actually, that might be possible. My friend at Channel 8, she's been working with federal agents who specialize in human trafficking. If we can give them enough evidence, they might be able to raid that compound. But what about Hope's safety in the meantime? Dr. Mitchell asked. Those men made it clear they're not giving up. I have an idea about that too, Daniel said. My cousin runs a horse farm in Montana, completely off the grid, no digital footprint, and the local community there is very protective of their privacy. If we can get Hope and her mother there quietly, they could disappear until this gets resolved. Elena looked up hopefully. Really? We could just disappear? For a while, Daniel confirmed, at least until the authorities shut down this trafficking ring. Hope tugged on Martha's apron. What about you and Farmer Ezra? You come too. Martha's breath caught, and she looked across the kitchen at her husband. For 3 years they'd been going through the motions of their life together, trapped in their shared grief and unable to find their way back to each other. But these past few days, caring for Hope, fighting to protect her, it had reminded them both of who they used to be. We'll see, sweetheart, Martha said softly. Right now, the important thing is keeping you safe. But Ezra caught his wife's eye and saw something there he hadn't seen in years. Purpose, passion, the fierce maternal love that had first attracted him to her. Maybe, just maybe, saving Hope could save their marriage too. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first pale rays of sunset were breaking through the clouds. It felt symbolic somehow, the storm passing, light returning, but Ezra knew they weren't out of danger yet. Doc Vance and his people would regroup, plan a new approach. The next attack might be subtle, indirect, harder to defend against. When do we leave? Elena asked. Tonight, Daniel said firmly. My cousin's expecting you. I'll drive you myself. Back roads, no highways. We'll have you in Montana within 2 days. Hope looked around the kitchen one more time at the faces of the people who had risked everything to save her. Thank you, she said in her careful English. All of you, you give me back my life. Bishop Miller placed a gentle hand on her head. Child, you gave us something too. You reminded us what we're fighting for, not just our own families, but all of God's children. As the community members began to disperse, making preparations for the dangerous journey ahead, Hope pulled Martha aside. Mama Martha, she said solemnly, using the name she'd given the woman who'd become her protector. When bad men are gone, you visit me in Montana. Martha knelt down to Hope's level, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, sweetheart. Good, Hope said, throwing her one good arm around Martha's neck. Because you're my family now, all of you, and family stays together. In that moment, surrounded by the people who had chosen to stand against darkness and protect the innocent, Martha Stoltzfus felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope for the future. Not just hope the child, but hope itself, returning to her heart like spring after the longest winter. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time since Samuel's death, Martha believed they might actually win. 2 weeks later, Martha stood in the kitchen of the Montana horse ranch, watching through the window as Hope helped Daniel's cousin, Rebecca, feed the horses. The little girl had adapted to ranch life with the resilience that seemed to define her. learning to brush the animals with one hand, helping with simple chores, and slowly beginning to smile again. But the peace was fragile, and everyone knew it. The phone rang, its shrill sound cutting through the morning quiet. Martha answered it quickly, not wanting to disturb Hope. "Martha?" It was Daniel's voice, but it was strained, urgent. "We have a problem." Martha's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "Dr. Vance didn't just disappear after we ran him off. He's been busy. My friend at Channel 8 just called. There are federal agents asking questions, but not the right kind of questions. They're treating Hope like a suspect, not a victim." "What do you mean?" "Somehow, Dr. Vance has convinced authorities that Hope is the daughter of illegal immigrants who stole her from a legitimate medical facility. He's painted your family and Elena as kidnappers who are preventing a sick child from receiving necessary medical treatment." Martha sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "That's insane. Anyone who looks at her injury can see what really happened." "Can they?" "Dr. Vance is claiming the amputation was the result of a rare genetic condition that required emergency surgery. He has medical records, signed consent forms from Elena, apparently forged, but very convincing ones. And Elena's immigration status isn't exactly clean, which doesn't help her credibility." Through the window, Martha watched Hope laugh as one of the horses nuzzled her remaining hand. The sound was like music after so many days of fear and tears. How could anyone look at that child and see anything other than an innocent victim? "There's more," Daniel continued. "They've issued warrants, federal warrants, for you, Ezra, Elena, and me. Kidnapping, interference with a federal investigation, harboring fugitives." Martha's world tilted. "We were protecting her. I know that. You know that. But Dr. Vance has money and connections, and apparently he's very good at spinning stories. The agents who are supposed to investigate human trafficking. They've been told this is a custody dispute involving illegal immigrants and religious extremists." "Religious extremists?" Martha's voice cracked. "That's what they're calling us. A dangerous Amish sect that preys on vulnerable immigrant families and steals their children for our own purposes." The kitchen door opened, and Elena walked in carrying a basket of eggs from the chicken coop. She took one look at Martha's face and immediately went pale. "What's wrong?" Martha covered the phone. "Federal agents are looking for us. Dr. Vance has convinced them we kidnapped Hope." Elena's legs gave out, and she collapsed into a chair. "Dios mío, they're going to take her back to those monsters." "No," Martha said fiercely, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "We won't let that happen." Daniel's voice crackled through the phone. "Martha, you need to run. Now. They know about the ranch. I don't know how, but they do." Rebecca got a call an hour ago from someone claiming to be a social worker, asking about new arrivals. "Where can we go?" "I'm working on it, but right now, you need to get Hope and Elena as far from that ranch as possible. Take the back roads, stay off the highways, and don't use any credit cards or phones." Martha's mind raced. "What about you? What about the evidence Hope gave us?" "I'm still trying to get it to the right people, but Dr. Vance has managed to discredit most of our sources. He's claiming the video testimony was coerced, that Hope has been brainwashed by religious fanatics." Elena was openly weeping now. "It's happening again, just like before. No one believes us because we're poor, because we're different." Hope's laughter drifted in through the window again, oblivious to the new danger closing in around them. Martha looked at this child who had brought purpose back into her life, who had helped her rediscover the capacity to love and fight for something beyond her own grief. "Daniel," she said into the phone, "we need more than just running and hiding. We need to go on the offensive." "What do you mean?" "Hope mentioned other children at that facility. If we could find them, get them to safety and have them tell their story." "Martha, that's incredibly dangerous. And we don't even know where the facility is exactly." "Hope does. She's been having nightmares about it, but she remembers details, landmarks, the route they took when they brought her there." Martha's voice grew stronger as a plan began to form. "What if we could find it? What if we could document what's really happening there? You're talking about infiltrating a criminal operation run by people who have already proven they're willing to kill. I'm talking about saving children. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Isn't that what our faith demands? Elena looked up sharply. You want to go back there, to that place? I want to end this, Martha said firmly. Not just for Hope, but for all the children still trapped there. Running and hiding means those other kids stay prisoners. It means Dr. Vance wins. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of horses whinnying outside, and Hope's delighted giggles. It was such a normal, peaceful sound, the sound of childhood as it should be. There's something else, Daniel said quietly. Ezra's been arrested. The words hit Martha like a physical blow. What? This morning Bishop Miller called. Federal agents showed up at your farm with a warrant. Ezra didn't resist, but they're holding him as a flight risk. No bail. Martha closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down on her shoulders. Her husband was in jail because they'd chosen to protect Hope. Their entire community was being painted as criminals because they'd stood up for what was right. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she felt something else rising up inside her, the same fierce determination that had led her to swing that skillet at Dr. Vance's thug. They could arrest Ezra, they could hunt her and Elena and Hope across the country, but they couldn't make her abandon these children. I'm going to find that facility, she said with quiet conviction. Martha, no, it's too dangerous. Elena, Martha turned to the younger woman. I need to ask something terrible of you. I need you to let Hope remember the route to that place. I know it will be traumatic for her, but it might be the only way to save the other children. Elena's face went through a series of emotions: fear, anguish, and finally, a mother's fierce protectiveness. She's already been through so much. I know, but she's also the bravest little girl I've ever met. And she's the only one who can lead us to the other. Hope appeared in the kitchen doorway, still laughing from her time with the horses. But her smile faded as she took in the adults' tense faces. Something wrong? She asked in her careful English. Martha knelt down to Hope's level, taking the child's hand in both of hers. Sweetheart, we need your help with something very important. There are other children, still trapped in the place where the bad men hurt you. We want to help them, but we need you to show us how to find them. Hope's face went very still. For a moment, she looked much older than her 7 years, as if she was carrying the weight of all the suffering she'd witnessed. The other children, she said quietly, Carlos and Maria and the others. Yeah, we want to bring them home to their families, just like we brought you home to your mama. Hope looked at Elena, then back at Martha. Will it be scary? Very scary, Martha admitted. But sometimes we have to do scary things to help people we love. Hope nodded solemnly. Carlos, he saved me, maybe I can save him too. Elena let out a sob and pulled Hope close. Mija, you don't have to do this. We can keep running, keep hiding. No, Mama, Hope said with startling maturity. Running means other children keep getting hurt. I don't want other children to lose their arms like me. Martha felt her heart breaking and swelling with pride at the same time. This child had already lost so much, but she was still willing to risk everything to save others. Daniel's voice crackled through the phone, which Martha had forgotten she was still holding. I can hear you talking. Please tell me you're not seriously considering this. I am, Martha said, standing up with new resolve, and I think you should consider it too. All of us should. Martha, how many federal agents do you think Dr. Vance has in his pocket? How many judges? How many politicians? We've seen how easily he can manipulate the system, but what he can't manipulate is the truth. Caught on camera, broadcast to the world. She looked around the kitchen, at Elena holding her daughter close, at Hope, small and scared but determined to help others, at the phone connecting her to friends who had already risked everything for them. We tried doing this the right way, Martha continued. We tried working through proper channels, trusting the authorities. Look where it got us. Ezra's in jail, we're fugitives, and those children are still trapped. Elena stood up slowly, still holding Hope's hand. What are you proposing exactly? We find the facility. We document what's happening there. We get the children out if we can, And if we can't, we make sure the whole world sees what Dr. Vance is really doing. And then what? Even if we succeed, we'll still be wanted criminals. Maybe, but those children will be free. And sometimes that's enough. Hope tugged on Martha's skirt. Mama, Martha, I know you're scared too. I can see it in your eyes. Martha looked down at this remarkable child who had survived horrors that would break most adults. Yes, sweetheart, I'm terrified, but you do it anyway. Yes, because you're worth it. All of you are worth it. Hope smiled then, the first truly peaceful smile Martha had seen from her. Then I help. I remember the way, even if it makes me sad. Daniel's voice came through the phone one more time. If you're really going to do this insane thing, you're not doing it alone. Give me 6 hours to get there, and don't move until I arrive. Daniel, you don't have to. Yes, I do. We all do. That's what family is for. As Martha hung up the phone, she realized that Hope had been right all along. Family wasn't just about blood or marriage certificates or shared DNA. Family was about the people who stood beside you when everything went dark, who chose to fight for each other no matter the cost. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, but for the first time in weeks, Martha wasn't afraid of what they might bring. Sometimes you had to walk through the storm to reach the sun on the other side. And sometimes walking through that storm was the only way to bring other people home. Well, she said to Elena and Hope, I guess we better start packing. Hope nodded gravely, and praying. Mama always said prayer makes you stronger for hard things. Your mama was a wise woman, Martha said, gathering this child who had become her daughter in all the ways that mattered into a fierce embrace. Tomorrow they would begin the most dangerous journey of their lives, but tonight they were still a family, and that was worth fighting for. It was worth everything. 6 months later, Martha stood in her own kitchen again, but everything had changed. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed brighter somehow, and the sounds of children's laughter filled the house in a way it hadn't since Samuel's death. Hope sat at the kitchen table, carefully writing in a notebook with her right hand, her left sleeve pinned neatly to her shoulder. She was learning to write English letters, and her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration as she formed each word. Beside her, a 10-year-old boy named Carlos, the same Carlos she'd spoken of during those dark nights of remembering, helped her sound out difficult words. Mama Martha, Hope called out using the name that had become official just 2 weeks ago when the adoption papers were finalized. How do you spell family? F-A-M-I-L-Y. Martha replied, her heart swelling every time she heard that word in Hope's voice. The raid on Dr. Vance's facility had been the most terrifying night of Martha's life, but also the most important. Daniel's contacts in legitimate law enforcement had finally listened when presented with video evidence that couldn't be explained away. Children in medical gowns, surgical equipment covered in blood, and Dr. Vance himself caught on camera discussing inventory management of human organs. The rescue itself had been chaotic and dangerous. Martha could still remember the weight of 5-year-old Maria in her arms as they ran through the dark forest, the little girl too traumatized to make a sound. Elena had carried another child, an 8-year-old boy, whose eye patch told its own horrible story. Hope had led them through the darkness with the determination of someone much older, never hesitating even when the facility's alarms began to wail behind them. They'd saved 11 children that night, 11 lives that would never have to experience the horror of being reduced to spare parts for wealthy clients. It hadn't been enough to save them all. 3 children had been too sick to move, and 2 others had been processed before they arrived. But 11 lives was 11 families restored, 11 futures returned. Vance was now serving life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. His entire network had unraveled once the first facility was exposed. Corrupt officials had been arrested, shell companies dissolved, and most importantly, other facilities in different states had been raided. The investigation had revealed an international operation that had been trafficking children for over a decade. The price of victory had been steep. Ezra had spent 2 months in federal custody before all charges were dropped, and public opinion shifted decisively in their favor. Daniel had lost his farm due to legal fees and the constant media attention. The entire Amish community had been thrust into a spotlight they'd never wanted, their peaceful way of life disrupted by reporters and investigators. But they'd survived it all, and now life was slowly returning to a new kind of normal. "Mama Martha," Carlos said, looking up from his writing, "when is Papa Ezra coming back from the barn?" Martha smiled. Carlos had been the last of the rescued children to be placed with permanent families. His own parents had been killed in the violence that led to his kidnapping, and after months in foster care, he'd asked specifically to stay with the Stoltzfuses. The adoption process for him was still underway, but in every way that mattered, he was already their son. "He'll be in for lunch soon," Martha replied, checking the pot of soup simmering on the stove. "Are you two almost finished with your lessons?" "Yes, Mama," Hope said, holding up her notebook proudly. "Look, I wrote about our family." Martha read the carefully printed words, "My name is Hope Stoltzfus. I have a mama named Martha, and a papa named Ezra, and a brother named Carlos. We also have a first mama named Elena, who visits every week. We live on a farm with cows and chickens, and a horse named Thunder. I lost my arm, but I found my family. I am happy now." Tears pricked Martha's eyes as she read her daughter's words. Elena had chosen to settle in Lancaster County, working as a translator for immigrant services and visiting the farm every Sunday for family dinners. She'd found peace in watching Hope thrive while building a new life for herself. One built on truth and dignity, rather than the desperate choices that had led to so much pain. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Martha said, kissing the top of Hope's head. The kitchen door opened, and Ezra walked in, stamping snow off his boots. At 46, he looked years younger than he had just months ago. The crushing weight of grief had been replaced by purpose and joy, and his eyes now crinkled with laugh lines that hadn't been there since Samuel's death. "How are my scholars today?" he asked, hanging his coat on the hook by the door. "Papa!" Carlos jumped up and ran to hug him, still marveling at the fact that he had a father again. "I wrote 3 whole pages about horses. Did you now? I'll have to read every word after lunch." Hope remained at the table, but her face lit up when she saw Ezra. The relationship between them was special. She'd never forgotten that he was the one who'd found her in the woods, who'd carried her to safety when she had nothing left to hope for. "Papa Ezra," she said seriously, "I have question. What's that, little bird?" He'd taken to calling her that after discovering her fondness for the small sparrows that nested in their barn. "At school, kids ask about my arm sometimes. They want to know what happened." Martha and Ezra exchanged glances. They'd been dreading this conversation, knowing that as Hope grew older and attended the local school, questions would inevitably arise. "What do you tell them?" Ezra asked gently, sitting down at the table beside her. "I tell them bad people hurt me, but good people saved me, and now I have the best family in the world." She paused thoughtfully. "Is that okay?" Martha felt her throat close up with emotion. "That's perfect, sweetheart. Some kids feel sorry for me because I only have one arm," Hope continued. "But I tell them I don't feel sorry for myself. I can do almost everything they can do, and I have something they don't have." "What's that?" Carlos asked curiously. "I have a story about how love is stronger than bad people, and I have a mama and papa who would fight dragons for me." Ezra reached over and took Hope's small hand in his much larger one. "We absolutely would. Dragons, monsters, anyone who tried to hurt you or Carlos." "I know," Hope said simply. "That's what makes me feel safe." A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it, expecting to see Jacob or one of their other neighbors. Instead, she found a young woman she didn't recognize standing on the porch, maybe 25 years old, with dark hair and nervous eyes. "Mrs. Stoltzfus," the woman asked hesitantly. "My name is Sophia Restrepo. I think you saved my brother." Martha's heart skipped a beat. "Your brother?" "Miguel. He was 8 years old when they took him. He's been telling everyone about the brave lady who carried him out of the dark place. Sophia's voice broke. I've been looking for him for 2 years. The social worker said he's been asking for the family that saved him. Through the kitchen doorway, Martha could see Hope and Carlos at the table, heads bent over their notebooks, safe and loved and whole despite everything they'd endured. She could see Ezra reading over Carlos's shoulder, his face soft with paternal pride. This was what they'd fought for. This was why they'd risked everything. Come in, Martha said, opening the door wider. Let me get you some coffee, and you can tell me about Miguel. As Sophia stepped into the warm kitchen, Hope looked up from her writing. Mama Martha, is that Miguel's sister? How did you know? Sophia asked in amazement. You have his eyes, Hope said matter-of-factly. And you look like someone who's been sad for a long time but might be happy now. Sophia began to cry, not tears of sadness, but tears of relief and joy and the overwhelming gratitude of someone who'd finally found what they'd thought was lost forever. He talks about you all the time, Sophia told Hope. He says an angel with one arm led him through the forest to safety. Not angel, Hope corrected with a small smile. Just girl who learned that running towards scary things sometimes is the only way to save people you love. Later that evening, after Sophia had been reunited with Miguel in an emotional scene that left everyone in tears, Martha sat on the front porch with Ezra, watching their children play in the yard. Carlos was teaching Hope how to throw a baseball with her right arm, while Thunder, their gentle old horse, grazed nearby. Do you ever regret it? Ezra asked quietly. Everything we went through, all the danger we put ourselves in. Martha considered the question as she watched Hope successfully throw the ball to Carlos, her face glowing with pride and determination. The little girl who'd been left to die in the woods had become a beacon of strength and resilience, inspiring everyone around her to be braver than they thought possible. Never, Martha said firmly. Before Hope, I was just existing, going through the motions of living without really being alive. She didn't just save us from our grief, Ezra. She reminded us who we were supposed to be. And who's that? People who fight for those who can't fight for themselves. People who choose love over fear, even when it's dangerous. Ezra nodded, wrapping his arm around his wife's shoulders. Samuel would be proud of us. I think he would be, Martha agreed. And I think he'd love his little sister and brother. As if she'd heard them talking about him, Hope looked up from her game and waved at them. Mama, Papa, watch this. She wound up with exaggerated concentration and threw the ball in a perfect arc to Carlos, who caught it with a whoop of joy. Both children turned to the porch with huge grins, seeking approval from the people who'd become their anchor in a world that had once seemed determined to destroy them. Beautiful throw, little bird, Ezra called out. Hope beamed and ran toward the porch, Carlos close behind. She climbed into Martha's lap with the casual confidence of a child who'd never doubted her place in the world, even though just months ago she'd had no place at all. Mama Martha, she said, snuggling against her adoptive mother's chest, I had a dream last night. Was it a scary dream? Martha asked, still protective of Hope's emotional well-being. No, it was a happy dream. I dreamed that all the children we couldn't save that night, they found families too. Good families like ours. Martha's eyes filled with tears. That's a beautiful dream, sweetheart. I think maybe it's not just a dream, Hope said thoughtfully. I think maybe it's a promise, like God is saying, don't worry, little sparrow. I'm watching over all my children, even when they're lost. Carlos climbed onto Ezra's lap, completing their family circle on the porch. Will we always be together? He asked, the question carrying the weight of a child who'd lost everything once and feared losing it again. Always, Martha said firmly. No matter what happens, no matter what challenges we face, we'll face them together. Promise? Hope asked. Promise, Ezra and Martha said in unison. As the sun set over their peaceful valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Martha marveled at how much their lives had changed. A year ago, she'd been a woman trapped in grief, unable to see beyond her own pain. Now she was the mother of two remarkable children, the wife of a man she'd fallen in love with all over again, and part of a community that had learned the true meaning of standing together against darkness. The path that had led them here had been terrifying and dangerous, paved with sacrifice and loss. But it had also been paved with love, the kind of love that refuses to turn away from suffering, that chooses to act even when action seems impossible, that believes in hope even in the darkest moments. "Mama Martha," Hope said sleepily, her head heavy against Martha's shoulder, "do you think there are other children out there who need families like ours?" Martha looked out at the rolling hills that surrounded their farm, knowing that somewhere in the world there were indeed other children who needed exactly what they had to offer: safety, love, and the unwavering belief that every life has value. "I'm sure there are, sweetheart." "Good," Hope murmured, her eyes already closing. "Because we have room for more love, don't we?" Martha looked at her husband, saw the same thought reflected in his eyes. Their family had been born from tragedy and forged in the fires of adversity, but it had taught them something precious. Love wasn't diminished by sharing it. Love multiplied, grew stronger, became more beautiful the more people it encompassed. "Yes," Martha whispered, kissing Hope's forehead as the little girl drifted off to sleep in her arms. "We have room for more love." Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, tiny points of light pushing back against the darkness, just like Hope herself had done, a small light that had illuminated the way home for so many people, including Martha and Ezra themselves. The little girl who'd been found broken in the woods had become the heart of a family that spanned biological bonds, ethnic differences, and every conventional definition of what family was supposed to look like. She'd taught them that families aren't just born, sometimes they're chosen, fought for, and built from the ground up with nothing but love and determination. As Martha carried her sleeping daughter into the house, with Ezra following behind with Carlos, she offered a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had led that broken little bird to their woods on that foggy October morning. Hope Esperanza Stoltzfus, the name on her adoption certificate, honoring both her new identity and her heritage, had saved them all, and in return, they'd given her something she'd never had before: a home where she was valued not for what she could provide to others, but simply for who she was. A beloved daughter, a cherished sister, a small miracle who'd reminded them all that sometimes the greatest acts of faith happen not in churches or through grand gestures, but in the quiet decision to open your heart to a stranger who needs exactly what you have to give. In the end, that was all any of them had really done. They'd opened their hearts and refused to close them, even when closing them would have been safer. It was, Martha thought as she tucked Hope into her bed, the most important thing any of them would ever do. And as Hope settled into sleep in her own room, in her own bed, surrounded by the family who'd chosen her just as surely as she'd chosen them, her last conscious thought was a prayer of her own, a prayer of gratitude for farmer angels who fought dragons, for mama hearts that had room for everyone, and for the mysterious ways that God turned the worst moments of one's life into the doorway to the very best. She was home, they were all home, and that was enough. It was everything.